Welcome all. Today I'd like to have a bit of a brief discussion about apps and apps as they relate to camera gear. Everybody's pretty well familiar with apps nowadays. Apple started the big trend with their advertising campaign of there's an app for that. Even though they weren't the first to develop or invent apps, they really brought it into the mainstream, and pretty much nowadays everybody is using apps for one thing or the other. And that's no different when it comes to the camera world, and I use apps myself. They're very useful, and I'm going to go through a few issues that I have with some of them, the good and the bad and so forth, and just passing on a little bit of a view on how things can fall afoul when it comes to camera companies, especially developing apps for their products. Now, one of the first cameras that I sort of connected with an app was the Olympus TG5. I actually bought this little camera for an action style camera that I could put on the front of my bull bar on my four-wheel drive. It could go underwater and all that sort of stuff, so it was a good robust little camera and works very well, in fact. And because of the fact that it's got a zoom lens in there, I can sort of zoom in and out, and I think it's got about a full frame equivalent of about 28 to 100mm zoom capability on it. So it was something that I preferred over the GoPro with their fisheye style lenses that they have, even though in the later ones I believe you can adjust the angle a little bit, but that's done electronically rather than with a lens, as far as I'm aware. This was great. The problem with it was that when it's attached to the front of the car, you have to sort of bend over and try to, or bend backwards over the bonnet to have a look at the screen, just make sure you've got it framed right. And then when you start recording, you just got to check to see whether it records. It was a bit of a pain doing that. And so Olympus actually came out with an app, OI or IO Share, and that I thought was going to be the U-boot thing for this, and I could have the phone in the car, link up to the camera, and start and stop recording when I needed to. The problem is that the idiots that designed that particular app didn't have a clue. What happened was that when you use the app to connect to the camera, what it does is it drops the resolution. I have this at 4K, and it drops it to 1080p automatically, and it records to the phone, not the camera. Even though it's got a big SD card inside, it will only record to the camera for whatever reason. Now, maybe for the Instagram crowds and things like that, that's fine, but when you actually want to control the camera just to turn it on and off, you can't do it with the app. I have no idea why it was designed that way. Fine if it does that, but there's no option to do it any other way. So that was just a massive fail, and my view, just a completely pointless application to make for this camera. I don't know if anybody uses it. The other thing that then came out was, as you may have noticed in a couple of earlier videos, I was using a tablet to connect to my EM1 via a USB cable, and that comes with a program now called Olympus Capture, and that allows you to basically tether to your camera like a lot of studio cameras have been able to do in the past, and even control the camera from the Windows app itself, and do all sorts of changes, etc. Focus, it was exposure, you name it. Focus was great. I could just change the camera focus from where I was, and it was beaut. But then I had a problem when I was doing a video a couple of weeks ago, and all of a sudden when I went into Resolve, I found that audio was all out of sync, and I just couldn't fathom what was going on. So as I delved deeper, I discovered that what had happened was the camera had recorded it in camera, but for some reason the resolution had been changed. Instead of 4K, went to 1080p and to 23.97 frames per second. I have got no idea why. And so when I checked back on the other videos that I've shot, they too were at 1080p. And then the penny dropped. This particular program does exactly the same thing as the little TG5 app does, that it changes everything in the camera, resolution wise and frame per second wise, to what you've actually got it set in camera. So basically the thing is useless. If I want to record at 4K at 24p, it won't do it when I do it through the Olympus Capture. I went through it, I couldn't find a single thing that would allow me to adjust the controls. Again, must have been the same idiot who designed the OI Share designed this particular one as well. So now that Olympus has sold his camera division off and it's gone to a conglomerate or whatever it is called JIP or JIP, let's hope that they employ some people who know about apps, because Olympus certainly hasn't got a clue. Now, I don't know if this is applicable to other camera companies, but it's been a perennial thing, I think, with camera companies. They do bodies and lenses and things, and they're fantastic at that. But when it comes to app design to connect to the camera, they don't have a clue. Now, the other thing that does work well, as I mentioned before, is the zip-on slider. It comes with an app that allows all sorts of things, and I think it's even being future-proofed with an optional thing on the other side which I haven't used, which is tracking and things like that. At the moment, all it does is basically goes backwards and forwards, which it does really well, either through the control on there or through the app itself, which allows you far more ability to do changes. And if I really wanted to, I could actually put a gimbal onto the slider itself and play around with that to get different movements, but it becomes complex. But it's got one of the best apps around, and they really seem to know what you required when it comes to building something functional. The Zhiyun is at a lower level than the Zip-On one. I mentioned that earlier, that it'd be great if it too could have more options to control the camera, especially if you say put that onto the table or a tripod like I mentioned, to do panning and things automatically. The follow mode and that, as I said, aren't all that great. It works, but not ideal. What would be great would be something like a little dongle or whatever that you could then just put in your pocket and it just follows the dongle, rather than having to worry about your orientation of your phone or something like that. I don't think that should be too difficult a thing to do, but who knows. But the app itself is sort of okay, but not what I would call fantastic. When you get onto then to somebody who really knows how to do apps is Filmic Pro. I've got Filmic Pro on my phone, and it really works well. It matches up actually quite well with the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, because you can shoot in the same aspect ratio. Doesn't take a lot of work to get it to a kind of match. It's not perfect, but it's not too bad either. And the thing is that Filmic Pro has a remote control app that emulates the screen on the phone itself and allows you to do all the changes as if you were actually touching the phone itself. And the reason why I wanted the remote app is that while I've got this on a gimbal, it works well. That's my little super light device. I can take the phone off the gimbal and actually attach it to the mount that I've got from a bull bar, and then control the operation of the camera from inside the car when I'm actually driving around. And that's something that I can't do with that because of the stupid app. But the Filmic Pro allows me to do full 4K, stop-start recording from inside, and even do parameter changes if I want to do that. So they really know about apps, and I think maybe the reason for that is that anybody who's sort of just coming from the mobile phone world and developing for the mobile phone world seems to have a better idea of what is actually needed when it comes to what the apps can and can't do. Blackmagic, for example, I believe there's an iOS app that allows you remote control, but there's nothing for Android for some reason. There have been people who are making control apps, and I mentioned once earlier before that there's a start-stop app that works quite well. But there's nothing else as far as that's concerned. And there seems to be a trend with camera companies all over that they don't seem to be able to blend mobile phone technology very well into their camera technology. And I think maybe that's because they're all, I wouldn't call them dinosaurs, but they come from a completely different era, and they probably have a difficult time getting their heads around what is the best way of allowing remote control and so on with cameras, especially cameras that are now doing video, because when you're shooting video, people often want to put the camera up and then move away and do controlling and so forth, far more than what they were doing with stills cameras, where cable release or a timer was more than adequate for what you wanted to do. So these are sort of my frustrations that I've got when it comes to apps applicable to particular cameras and so forth. I'd put right down at the bottom of the barrel anything that Olympus has made, and I love Olympus. I've been using them since 2004. Fantastic cameras. I've still got the very first E1. Lenses from that era, and I'm using one even on the Blackmagic. Fantastic. They really, really do know how to make cameras and lenses. But as far as apps go, not at all. They shouldn't even bother as far as I'm concerned, because they're so bad. But again, my thoughts, other people might disagree with that, but I'm hoping that things like this get out there to the camera manufacturers and to others, and they start thinking about how to better integrate the modern technology with the old technology. And I consider cameras, whether they're digital or not, still to be that sort of old technology in the concept of things, rather than what mobile phones and so are nowadays, which are, you know, all-encompassing computers and imaging devices and whatever. So they're my thoughts, right or wrong. It's a little frustration that I've been having over the last year or so when it comes to doing things with the products that I've got. As always, I forgot to mention one thing, and that's the Zhiyun TransMount transmitter app, which I'm using on my phone right now to get composition. And I think that's one of the apps that they have got right. It works very, very well. If I had the appropriate camera, you could even control the starting and stopping recording, but you can't do that with the Olympus camera. And there might be a little bit of latency in there, but that's to be expected, given that it's not exactly one of the highest priced transmitters that you can buy. So it works quite well for what it's designed to do. So I thought I'd just want to give kudos to Zhiyun as far as that's concerned. So that's all I've got to say, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.